At my own birthday party, in front of everyone I loved, my father raised his glass and said, "A single mom is a family disgrace. Get out." The room went silent. My child froze in my arms. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That night didn't just break my heart, it rewrote my entire life. My name is Bryn, and I never thought my father would hate me more than he loved his image. I had worked hard to raise my daughter, Lark, on my own. I paid my bills, stayed out of trouble, and tried to be a good mother. Still, to him, I was a mistake standing in front of his guests. No one defended me. My mother stared at the table. My brother looked away. I walked out with my daughter while people avoided my eyes. I cried in the car, not because of the words, but because of the silence. A few days later, my aunt came to see me. She told me the truth my father hid for years. My grandfather had left part of the family property to me, meant to protect me if I was ever mistreated. My father kept it secret, thinking I was too weak to question him. I didn't confront him. I stayed calm. I met with a lawyer and claimed what was legally mine. Months later, my father lost control of the very things he bragged about. He showed up at my door, angry and confused. I didn't yell. I didn't insult him. I just told him that respect cannot exist without love. Today, my daughter sleeps peacefully in a home built on honesty, not pride. I lost my family that night, but I found my strength, and that changed everything. I am Bryn Hale, and the life I live now was never part of my dreams. I once imagined a shared future, 2 parents, and a steady home filled with warmth. Instead, I found myself standing alone, learning how to be strong faster than I expected. When Lark came into my world, everything changed. She became my reason to wake up early and keep going even when I felt exhausted. Each morning, I balanced work and childcare, moving through long days without help. I earned my income honestly and made sure every light stayed on and every meal was warm. Our home was small, but it was calm. Lark laughed often, and her smile reminded me that stability does not always look grand. It only needs love and effort. I knew I had flaws. Some nights I doubted myself. Some choices still haunted me. Yet I carried pride in surviving without leaning on anyone. I learned to fix problems on my own and to protect my child from worry. That pride was quiet, but it was real. My father, Cal Hale, never saw it that way. From the moment he realized I would be raising a child without a partner, his attitude shifted. His words were sharp, and his looks were colder than silence. He believed success meant control and perfection. To him, independence without approval was failure. Every family gathering felt tense. Compliments never came. Advice sounded more like judgment. I tried to prove myself through actions, hoping effort would soften his view. It never did. No matter how hard I worked or how well Lark thrived, disappointment followed me like a shadow. Still, I kept moving forward. I told myself that being present for my child mattered more than earning praise I would never receive. I held on to dignity, even when it felt invisible. Inside our household, tension lived quietly but constantly. My mother, Ione, mastered the art of saying nothing. Whenever voices rose or opinions clashed, she would busy herself with dishes, laundry, or anything that kept her from choosing a side. Her silence was not peace, it was absence. I learned early that expecting protection from her would only lead to disappointment. My brother, Pax, handled conflict differently. The moment discomfort appeared, he vanished. He would step outside, take a call, or suddenly remember an errand. Avoidance was his shield. By leaving, he kept himself safe, but he also left me standing alone. I never blamed him fully, yet his distance added weight to moments that already felt heavy. At the center of everything stood Cal. He measured worth through appearances and status. To him, family existed to be admired, not understood. Emotions were weaknesses, and compassion was optional. His pride shaped every decision, every conversation, every rule we followed. Love came second to how things looked from the outside. Extended relatives understood this without needing explanation. They lowered their voices around him, chose their words carefully, and never challenged his views. Harmony was maintained by submission. Anyone who disrupted that balance became a problem. When my birthday approached, I allowed myself a small sense of hope. Cal insisted on hosting. He called it a fresh start, a chance to move forward. He used calm language, almost gentle. Ione nodded along. Pax even smiled when the plan was mentioned. I told myself this gathering meant acceptance. I believed effort would finally be recognized. Maybe time had softened judgment. Maybe pride had made room for understanding. The house was decorated carefully, guests invited thoughtfully, and everything appeared perfect. From the outside, it looked like unity. What I didn't realize then was that this event wasn't about healing. It was about control. The celebration was never meant for me. It was meant to restore his image and remind everyone who held power. That belief shattered before the night was over. The moment arrived calmly, almost gently. Dessert had been served, plates passed around, and polite smiles filled the space. Laughter sounded forced but steady. Everything felt staged, like a performance meant to appear warm. I remember watching hands move, hearing silverware touch glass, believing the tension had finally eased. Then Cal rose from his seat. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Attention shifted toward him the way it always did. He cleared his throat, holding his drink like a judge preparing a verdict. His voice carried confidence, not affection. What followed wasn't a toast. It was an announcement. He spoke about standards, about values, about how choices reflect on bloodlines. Each sentence cut deeper than the last. When he looked at Lark, his expression hardened. He labeled her existence as evidence of my shortcomings. The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's nightmare. Heat rushed to my face. I couldn't breathe. Guests froze, unsure whether to react or retreat. My hands tightened around my child without thinking. I felt her body tense against mine, sensing danger without understanding language. Cal continued, listing everything he believed I had ruined. He spoke of shame as if it were currency, something I had wasted. He made it clear that my presence damaged his standing. Then he finished by ordering me out, treating me like an unwanted guest rather than his own flesh. No one interrupted. No one objected. The silence gave his cruelty permission to exist. I stood slowly, legs shaking, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my thoughts. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked past faces that refused to meet my eyes, carrying the one person who mattered. As I crossed the doorway, something inside me broke cleanly in two. What shattered wasn't pride or hope. It was the belief that love could survive humiliation. In that instant, I understood I had been invited not to celebrate, but to be erased. What wounded me most was not the command to leave, but the emptiness that followed it. I searched the room for any sign of resistance, any spark of care, and found none. Ione did not move. Her hands remained folded, her eyes fixed somewhere far away, as if detachment could protect her from guilt. That quiet choice cut deeply. Pax stayed frozen for a moment, then slowly turned his body away. He didn't speak. He didn't even look back. His distance felt intentional, like he had already decided that disappearing was easier than standing beside me. In that instant, I realized how alone I truly was. I stepped forward with Lark pressed close to my chest. She clung to me, confused and frightened by the sudden shift in energy. Around us, people avoided eye contact. Some focused on their plates. Others pretended to adjust chairs or gather coats. No one offered comfort. No one questioned what had just happened. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Each step toward the exit felt slower than the last. My heart pounded, not with anger, but with disbelief. I had entered that house hoping for acceptance. I was leaving stripped of dignity. As I crossed the room, whispers hummed quietly, careful not to be heard. Their restraint hurt more than shouting ever could. It confirmed that humiliation was easier to witness than to challenge. That unspoken agreement among them echoed louder than any insult. Outside, the night felt cold and sharp. I paused for a moment, steadying my breath while Lark buried her face against my shoulder. I didn't shed tears yet. Shock held them back. What stayed with me was not his voice, but the collective decision to remain passive. The absence of defense became its own form of betrayal. Words can sting, but abandonment leaves a deeper mark. That silence followed me long after I left the driveway, settling into my chest like a weight I would carry for years. Later, when the door closed behind us and the world finally grew quiet, reality settled in. The small room felt unfamiliar, even though it was ours. Lark sat beside me, her eyes wide with confusion rather than fear. After a long pause, she spoke softly, asking why her grandfather seemed upset with us. Her question landed heavier than any insult spoken earlier. I opened my mouth, then stopped. Nothing came. How could I explain cruelty to someone so innocent? How could I translate pride, judgment, and rejection into language a child could understand without hurting her? I pulled her close instead, pressing a kiss against her hair, hoping warmth could replace words I didn't have. Once she finally drifted into sleep, exhaustion took over. I lay awake beside her, staring into the darkness. My thoughts spiraled without direction. I replayed the evening repeatedly, searching for something I could have done differently. Every memory ended the same way, with distance instead of care. Tears came quietly. I covered my mouth, afraid even sorrow might disturb her rest. My chest felt tight, as if grief had weight. I questioned everything I believed about connection. Was shared history enough to guarantee protection? Or did family only exist when it was convenient? I remembered moments from childhood, times I mistook duty for affection. Rules had always mattered more than reassurance. Approval was conditional. Love felt earned, never given freely. That night forced me to see those patterns clearly, stripped of excuses. I realized I had spent years chasing validation that was never promised. The realization hurt, but it also brought clarity. Loyalty, I learned, cannot be demanded through lineage alone. It requires courage, empathy, and presence. As dawn slowly approached, my tears dried. What remained was emptiness mixed with resolve. I didn't know what the future held, but I understood one thing with certainty: whatever family truly meant. 7 days passed before anything changed. I assumed life would continue in the same quiet, heavy way, until a knock interrupted the afternoon. When I opened the door, I saw Rue standing there. Her presence alone felt unusual. She rarely involved herself in family matters, especially ones tied to Cal. She stepped inside without small talk. Her expression carried urgency mixed with caution, as if she had debated this visit for days. After sitting down, she took a slow breath and told me there was something I deserved to know. Her voice stayed low, steady, almost protective. Rue explained that Cal's confidence was built on a story he repeated for years. The house he constantly praised as his greatest achievement wasn't entirely under his ownership. The enterprise he claimed to have built from nothing wasn't solely his either. Behind the image he carefully maintained were arrangements he never mentioned publicly. As she spoke, pieces began to align. Certain restrictions, unexplained decisions, moments when he avoided paperwork discussions, all of it suddenly made sense. Rue said these details were never meant to surface unless circumstances demanded it. She believed that moment had arrived. She didn't dramatize the revelation. There was no excitement in her tone, only certainty. Cal, she explained, depended on everyone believing he held absolute control. That belief kept others obedient. It kept questions away. It kept truth buried. Rue handed me copies of records she had safeguarded for years. She said she held on to them because she trusted my character more than his authority. That trust shook me. It was the first time someone in the family chose me without hesitation. After she left, I sat alone, staring at the pages spread across the table. The power dynamic I had accepted my entire life suddenly felt fragile. What I had been taught to fear was not as solid as it appeared. That visit marked a turning point. I didn't feel excitement or anger, only clarity. The version of Cal I had known relied heavily on illusion. And now that illusion had cracks. For the first time, I understood that the ground beneath him wasn't unshakable. And neither was my position anymore. Time passed, and distance created space for clarity. One afternoon, an unexpected visit changed everything. A relative arrived carrying old folders, yellowed papers, and a seriousness that demanded attention. Inside those documents lived a truth carefully buried for years. My grandfather, long gone but never absent in intention, had planned ahead. Before his passing, he had arranged safeguards. Portions of land, finances, and authority were assigned directly to me, not as a gift, but as protection. He had seen what others ignored. He anticipated harm long before it surfaced. Those arrangements were meant to stand quietly unless mistreatment occurred. Cal knew about this. He had always known. Instead of honoring that decision, he concealed it. He controlled assets that were never fully his, confident I lacked the courage, resources, or awareness to question him. He counted on obedience. He relied on my silence. Holding those records in my hands felt unreal. Dates, signatures, legal language, everything confirmed the truth. This wasn't rumor or interpretation. It was enforceable. What shocked me most wasn't the deception itself, but how easily it had been maintained for so long. Power thrives on assumption, and he assumed I would remain small. For the first time, fear loosened its grip. I wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. I was stepping into something that had been mine all along. My grandfather's foresight became my anchor. His quiet protection reached me exactly when I needed it. Understanding my position brought calm rather than excitement. There was no rush to confront. No dramatic announcement. Knowledge itself was strength. I finally understood the structure beneath years of control. This truth didn't erase pain, but it shifted balance. The narrative I'd been forced to accept cracked open. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't dependent. I had standing, not because I demanded it, but because it was legally and intentionally placed in my hands. For once, the future didn't feel threatening. It felt possible. I chose restraint over reaction. Speaking to Cal would have changed nothing, and I understood that words could weaken what silence strengthened. Instead of emotional responses, I focused on action taken quietly and carefully. Each decision was deliberate, measured, and free of impulse. Through a discreet recommendation, I connected with an attorney named Olin. He listened without interruption, studying every detail with patience. There was no judgment in his expression, only focus. He explained options plainly, outlining steps rather than promises. That approach grounded me. It reminded me that justice moves steadily, not loudly. I spent evenings sorting through records, letters, and certified files. Every signature mattered. Every date carried weight. What once felt overwhelming slowly formed a clear structure. Organization became my shield. Preparation replaced fear. Throughout the process, I kept my emotions guarded. Anger tempted me, but I refused to let it dictate my choices. Reacting too soon would have given away control. Silence allowed leverage to grow unnoticed. While others assumed I had retreated, I was building something solid beneath the surface. There were moments when impatience crept in. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted fairness restored immediately. Olin reminded me that timing determined outcome. Acting prematurely could unravel everything. Waiting required discipline, but it preserved advantage. I continued daily routines as usual, never revealing change. That normalcy protected my position. Those who underestimated me remained unaware, and that ignorance worked in my favor. Strength, I learned, often appears invisible until it's unavoidable. This phase wasn't fueled by spite. It was guided by precision. I wasn't seeking chaos or public reckoning. I wanted resolution rooted in facts, not emotion. Strategy replaced confrontation. Each step forward brought clarity. I wasn't reclaiming dignity through confrontation. I was securing stability through foresight. The path I chose wasn't dramatic, but it was effective. And when the moment arrived, it wouldn't require raised voices to be felt. The groundwork was already laid, and the outcome was quietly inevitable. The outcome arrived without warning or ceremony. Once the final filings were processed, authority shifted on paper first, then in reality. Cal no longer held the reins he once tightened around everything. Decisions he made for decades now required approval he didn't possess. Power slipped away quietly, the same way it had been taken from me years earlier. News traveled fast within the family, though no one admitted how they learned it. Phone calls began coming in from numbers that had stayed silent for a long time. Voices sounded cautious, almost polite. People who once avoided eye contact now asked if we could meet, saying they wanted to clear the air. Their sudden interest felt calculated, not caring. Invitations followed. Coffee offers. Casual drop-ins. Familiar faces carried unfamiliar warmth. They spoke gently, choosing words as if stepping across thin ice. Some hinted at misunderstandings. Others blamed stress or poor timing. None mentioned the night I was dismissed or the way they looked away. I listened without responding much. Observing them was more revealing than questioning them. Their concern wasn't about repair, it was about adjustment. They were learning how to position themselves now that influence had changed hands. Loyalty, it seemed, followed access. What struck me most was how differently Cal was treated. The same people who once deferred to him now spoke around him carefully, unsure of where he stood. Respect evaporated. When authority did. Watching that shift brought no satisfaction, only clarity. I declined most conversations. Not out of bitterness, but because silence felt honest. I didn't need explanations that arrived too late. I didn't need apologies shaped by convenience. The balance had changed, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to events, I was witnessing them from solid ground. Consequences didn't come with drama or celebration. They came with exposure. In the end, nothing needed to be said. The truth revealed itself through behavior. And that was enough for me to move forward without looking back. The knock on the door startled me, but not as much as the figure on the other side. Cal stood there, familiar yet unfamiliar, carrying none of the confidence he once wore like armor. His eyes searched mine, searching for control, and found none. The posture that had commanded rooms, silenced arguments, and dominated conversations was gone. He didn't speak at first. His hands rested awkwardly at his sides, betraying uncertainty he rarely allowed anyone to see. There was no speech prepared, no sharp remarks, no attempt to assert superiority. The silence between us was heavier than any words he could have said. I met him calmly, holding myself steady. Lark played quietly in the background, unaware of the tension but sensing the strange shift in energy. I didn't yell. I didn't remind him of the past. I didn't force him to face humiliation through my voice. There was no need. His expression said it all. Time had reversed the balance. The man who once dictated everything now stood waiting, unsure of his place, realizing the consequences of his choices. He had counted on fear and obedience to sustain his control, but both had slipped away. I let the moment stretch, letting him recognize the emptiness of his authority without interference. Power, I understood, can vanish quietly, leaving nothing but reflection. I didn't need to prove a point with words, the truth was evident. Eventually, he spoke, hesitating, but the tone lacked command. I answered simply, without emotion, without judgment. The encounter ended without confrontation, yet the shift was undeniable. For the first time, I observed him, not as a father, not as a figure of dominance, but as a man confronted with the results of his actions. And in that quiet, unspoken understanding, I finally felt the weight of freedom settle over me. I looked him squarely in the eyes, feeling the calm I had carried for months settle fully into my chest. The room seemed smaller, tighter, as if it had shrunk around the tension between us. No one else was present, no audience to distract or dilute the moment. It was just him, me, and the weight of years he had never considered. His lips moved, hesitated, and then closed again. I let the silence stretch, letting him feel the absence of his usual authority. Every second underscored what he had underestimated, my resolve, my independence, and the bond between me and the life I had built. Finally, I spoke, each word deliberate, measured, and unshakable. You didn't lose control because I'm a single mom. You lost it because you forgot I was your daughter. The words hung in the air like a verdict. He swallowed, trying to respond, but the clarity in my tone left no room for interruption or denial. This wasn't accusation, it was truth distilled into its purest form. For the first time, I saw recognition flicker in his eyes, not pride, not defiance, but understanding that authority does not guarantee respect. Blood alone does not command allegiance. I wasn't seeking apology, and I wasn't demanding validation. I was stating a fact he could no longer ignore. He turned slightly, exhaling slowly, as if the realization had exhausted him. The room stayed quiet. I didn't soften my voice or retreat. My presence, calm and unwavering, spoke as loudly as any boundary, a reckoning, and a closure all at once. I didn't need to shout or attack. The moment was complete in its honesty, and in it, I finally felt the shift fully settle. The daughter he had dismissed was no longer defined by his opinion, and the life we built was entirely ours. Life after that night felt unfamiliar at first, like stepping into a world I had never allowed myself to imagine. I started making decisions without waiting for anyone's blessing. Every choice, every step, was guided by what Lark and I needed, not by what anyone else thought we should do. The freedom was strange at first, but it grew comforting with each passing day. I surrounded us with people who genuinely cared, whose presence was earned and chosen. Friends who lifted us instead of judging us, mentors who encouraged rather than dismissed, neighbors who welcomed us rather than overlooked us. Lark thrived in that environment, laughing freely, exploring curiosity without hesitation, learning that love could be constant when given willingly. Time softened the sting of betrayal. I forgave neither fully nor quickly, but I learned to release the weight of resentment from my own shoulders. Closure didn't arrive through confrontation or reconciliation, it came quietly, through steady routines, small successes, and the security of a home built on trust. Each birthday reminds me of the night that seemed unbearable. I remember the door closing behind us, the silence, the shock of rejection. And I smile, because that moment, painful as it was, pushed me to claim a life I never would have dared to create otherwise. Being cast out forced me to find strength I didn't know I had. It allowed me to shape a future defined by choice, love, and dignity. Every year, I honor that night, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. Losing them became the catalyst that made everything else possible. It was the turning point where fear transformed into resilience, and despair became freedom. In the end, I learned that the life you build for yourself and those you love is far more meaningful than approval ever could be. Hey besties! Thanks for sticking with me through this emotional journey. Imagine celebrating your birthday, only to be humiliated by the people who should love you most. Feeling abandoned and judged, I had to find strength within myself to protect my daughter and reclaim my life. Years of careful planning, patience, and quiet determination led to justice and freedom. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.